Today, we will unveil the secrets of Asherah. Her name might be familiar to you, perhaps as just another Canaanite deity, an enemy of the true faith, but the truth is far more complex and shocking. Asherah was not merely a foreign idol, she was a powerful force at the very core of early Israelite religion. Imagine her not as an enemy, but as a celestial mother, a consort, revered by many as a companion to Yahweh himself. Sounds scandalous, doesn't it? But what if I told you we have proof? In recent decades, archaeologists have unearthed discoveries that overturn our perceptions. Inscriptions, dug from the sands of the Sinai Desert and the hills of Judea, speak of Yahweh and his Asherah, not as adversaries, but as a divine couple. But how is this possible? Why doesn't the Bible tell this story? The answer is, it does, but in a hidden way. The very texts that condemn the Asherah poles and the sacred groves actually reveal how deeply rooted her worship was. Why did the prophets and kings fight so fiercely to remove her? Because she was everywhere. This isn't just a story about ancient beliefs. This is a story about a massive cover-up, about the deliberate erasure of the feminine divine in favor of a strictly patriarchal monotheism. Asherah's story was rewritten, and she herself demonized and forgotten. But the truth has a way of coming to light, even after millennia. Archaeology and a careful reading of ancient texts reveal a much richer and more complex spiritual picture of the ancient world. Asherah's story makes us ask, what else don't we know about our past? What other truths are waiting to be uncovered from beneath the sands of time? When we imagine the history of ancient Israel, we often think of a clear division, the monotheistic Israelites versus the pagan Canaanites. But the reality, as is often the case, was much more complex and blurred. In fact, to understand why the Bible so fiercely condemns the worship of the goddess Asherah, we must first understand why it was almost inevitable. Forget the idea of a swift and complete military conquest of Canaan. Archaeological and even biblical accounts paint a different picture. When the Israelites arrived, they didn't wipe the Canaanites off the map. Instead, they settled primarily in the less populated mountainous regions. And in the fertile valleys and fortified cities, there, Canaanite culture continued to flourish. These two groups, Israelites and Canaanites, didn't just exist side by side. They were neighbors, trading partners, and inevitably, families. Imagine it, you're an Israelite farmer. You need better tools, beautiful pottery, or fabrics dyed in the famous purple color. You go to the nearest Canaanite city. There, you meet people, you form connections. Your sons marry their daughters, and your daughters, their sons. This isn't just speculation. The Bible itself, in the book of Judges, describes it directly. After listing the Canaanite peoples who were not driven out, the text in chapter 3, verse 6 says something extraordinary. Judges 3:6. And they took their daughters as wives for themselves, and gave their own daughters to their sons, and served their gods. This verse is the key. The mixing of peoples directly led to the mixing of beliefs. When a Canaanite woman married into an Israelite family, she didn't leave her mother goddess, her patroness of home and fertility, at the doorstep. She brought her with her. And that goddess was most often Asherah. So, who was Asherah? In the Canaanite pantheon, she was the supreme goddess, consort of the chief god El, and mother of the gods, including the mighty Baal. She was the mother goddess, a symbol of fertility, life, and protection. For the common person, whose life depended on the harvest and healthy children, Asherah was extremely close and accessible. She was worshipped not only in large temples, but also at home, through small clay figurines. Archaeologists have discovered dozens of such figurines in homes from the time of ancient Israel. She was also worshipped through sacred wooden poles or entire groves called Asherahs. But the most shocking evidence comes from a remote site called Kuntalit Ajrud.
There, on fragments of large clay vessels from the 8th century BCE, inscriptions were found that read, "I bless you by Yahweh and his Asherah." Yes, you heard that right, Yahweh and his Asherah. This inscription has sparked decades of debate. Is Asherah here the name of the goddess consort, or does it refer to her symbol, the sacred pole? In either case, it's clear. For some ancient Israelites, the worship of Yahweh and the presence of Asherah were not in conflict. They went hand in hand. And this is where we return to the Bible. Because while for many people this merging of cultures was an everyday occurrence, for the biblical prophets and reformers, it was a mortal sin. Immediately after the verse about mixed marriages that we quoted comes the accusation. Judges 3:7. "And the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served the Baals and the Asherahs." There it is. The stage for conflict is set. On one side is the natural, almost inevitable process of cultural and religious mixing, born of coexistence and intermarriage. On the other side is the fierce condemnation by the emerging strict monotheism, which saw Asherah not as a comforter and mother, but a threat to the one true God.
The Bible gives us clear clues. In Deuteronomy 16:21, God commands, "You shall not plant any Asherah tree beside the altar of the Lord your God." This is not just a statue. Asherahs were carved wooden images, often described as poles or even living trees, shaped and planted in the ground. They were placed beside the altars of Baal, another powerful deity of the region. Their worship was a direct challenge to the faith in Yahweh. And now we reveal the most astonishing claim. We are not talking about some small forgotten village. We are talking about the Jerusalem temple itself, the central hub of Yahweh worship. 2 Kings 21:7 describes one of King Manasseh's greatest transgressions, and he set the carved image of Asherah that he had made in the house. Imagine that, a symbol of a pagan goddess placed in the holiest place for the Judeans. This was an unheard of act of sacrilege that shook the foundations of their faith. Here we come to the key to understanding the enigma, the dual meaning of the name Asherah. When you read about Asherah in the Bible, you should know that the word can mean two things. The goddess Asherah, an ancient Canaanite mother goddess, sometimes considered the consort of the supreme god El. Thus, when the prophets condemned Asherahs, they were speaking both against the worship of the goddess herself and against the physical idols that represented her. And so, the mystery is revealed. Asherah was not just a statue, but a powerful religious symbol, a carved wooden pole which even penetrated the Jerusalem temple. Her name is both the name of a goddess and of her idol. A story of faith, rebellion, and forgotten deities hidden in ancient texts. The worship of Asherah, a Canaanite goddess of fertility, was not a private practice, but a deeply rooted communal public affair. In the time of the Judges, the Israelites often succumbed to the allure of Canaanite religions, believing that these deities would provide them with fertile harvests and abundance. The symbol of Asherah was often a sacred tree or pole placed next to the altar of Baal. The worship was so widespread that even the city leader, Joash, the father of Gideon himself, served as a priest of Asherah. This shows not only the acceptance, but also the institutionalization of this cult in society. Imagine the sight, a central place in the city with an altar dedicated to Baal and an erected sacred pole of Asherah, where residents regularly offered sacrifices and participated in rituals led by their respected elder. Prompted by God's command, Gideon undertook a radical act that directly opposed this deeply ingrained practice. Here's how the Bible describes it. Judges 6:25-27. That same night, the Lord said to him, "Take your father's bull, and the second bull 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it.
and build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold, with the stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down." So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was afraid of his father's household and the men of the city, he did not do it by day, but did it by night. Thus, under the cover of night, Gideon destroyed his father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah, using the very wood from the sacred pole to burn a sacrifice to the Lord. This act was not just a religious, but also a highly public desecration of places and symbols sacred to the community. When the city residents discovered the desecrated altar and the cut-down Asherah in the morning, a furious public protest erupted. Their reaction was immediate and violent. They demanded Gideon's execution. To them, Gideon was not merely a blasphemer, but a threat to their very existence, as they believed the gods would take revenge on them. It was at this critical moment that Gideon's life was saved only by the intervention of his father, Joash. Although he was a priest of Asherah, Joash showed unexpected wisdom and insight. He responded to the crowd with the following, Judges 6:31. Then Joash said to all who stood against him, "Will you contend for Baal, or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death this very morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because someone has pulled down his altar." With these words, Joash not only prevented his son's death, but also challenged the logic of Baal worship. If Baal is a true god, why does he need protection from humans? Let him defend himself. This intervention highlights how deeply rooted the worship was. Only the intervention of his father, who likely had certain authority and influence among the people, managed to save Gideon from lynching. Despite Gideon's brave and decisive act, the Bible implies that this was largely an isolated incident in the broader context of Israelite history during this period. Although Gideon brought temporary deliverance from the Midianites and restored the worship of the Lord, the worship of Canaanite deities, including Asherah, continued to be a problem for generations to come. The book of Judges repeatedly describes the cycle of apostasy and repentance, showing that the Israelites often returned to idolatry. This continued attraction to Asherah underscores the resilience of these cults and how difficult it was for the Israelites to abandon practices that were deeply intertwined with their agricultural and cultural life. Gideon's act was exceptional and prophetic, but it failed to completely eradicate the worship of Asherah from the hearts of the people.
Widespread the worship of Asherah was in ancient Israel. We know that her images, the Asherahs, were often wooden poles planted in the ground. But here comes the big question. If these wooden Asherahs were so widespread, why do we find almost no physical evidence of them today? Why don't archaeologists discover thousands of such artifacts? The answer lies in the harsh reality of the climate in Palestine. Unlike dry desert regions like Egypt, where organic materials can be preserved for millennia, the climate in Israel is different. It is relatively humid in winter and extremely dry in summer. This cyclical change, combined with the activity of microorganisms, insects, and even people over the centuries, means one thing: wood simply does not survive millennia in the ground. It rots, disintegrates into dust, is absorbed by the soil, or is simply destroyed. Even if they were buried, organic materials have an extremely small chance of being preserved, except under very specific and rare conditions. And this is where archaeology plays a crucial role in filling this historical gap. Although we do not find thousands of wooden Asherahs, this does not mean that they did not exist. Archaeologists look for, and find, indirect evidence that testify to their presence. What is this evidence? Archaeological clues revealing Asherah. Foundations of altars and sanctuaries. Often, around Baal worship sites, traces of holes or foundations are found where wooden Asherah poles could have stood. Although the wood itself is missing, the structures around it provide clear indications. Clay figurines of Asherah.
As we already mentioned, archaeologists have discovered hundreds, even thousands of small clay figurines depicting nude female deities with prominent breasts, often on a cylindrical column. These figurines, dated from various periods of Israelite history, are considered miniature copies of the large wooden Asherahs. They were part of domestic cults and show how deeply the worship of Asherah penetrated people's daily lives. Clay is much more durable than wood and has survived through the centuries. Inscriptions and texts. Perhaps the most direct evidence comes from ancient inscriptions. One of the most famous examples is from Kuntalet Ajrud, dated to around 800 BCE, where an inscription was found blessing Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah. Similar inscriptions show that for some ancient Israelites, Asherah was directly associated with Yahweh, perhaps as his consort or divine companion. These texts are extremely valuable because they provide written evidence of her existence and role. Indirect biblical clues. The Bible itself, although it tries to erase Asherah, still contains indirect clues. The repeated condemnation of Asherahs by prophets and kings shows that they were a real and widespread problem for the monotheistic reform. They would not condemn something that did not exist. So, although wooden Asherahs have not survived in physical form due to natural conditions, archaeology is our bridge to this lost past. Through careful study of the remaining artifacts, clay figurines, inscriptions, foundations of structures, we are able to reconstruct the picture. We understand that Asherah was not just some peripheral Canaanite deity, but a deeply rooted part of the religious life of the ancient Israelites, whose presence was much more significant than the traditional narrative teaches us.
Asherah also held immense significance as a domestic deity. What does this mean? Similar to the teraphim known from the Bible, small household deities or idols that were kept for protection and good luck, Asherah was part of the intimate, personal life of families. She was not just a goddess worshipped in large temples or public places, but was a presence in the homes themselves, in the private spaces of families. This completely changes our perception of the religious practice of ordinary people in Israel. When archaeologists began excavating ancient settlements in Palestine, they constantly came across the same thing: numerous small clay figurines of nude women. We are not talking about a few random finds, but thousands of such objects. These figurines have been found at sites dating from all periods of Israelite history, from the earliest settlements to the period of the kings and even beyond. This indicates their continuous and ubiquitous presence throughout the centuries. They were found in homes, in tombs, in common storerooms, everywhere people lived, worked, and died. This tells us something very important. These figurines were an integral part of daily life, not just isolated cult objects. Among all these figurines, one type stands out and has been identified as the most probable representation of Asherah. These are female figures with prominent breasts, often holding them in their hands, placed on a cylindrical or pillar-like base. Some of them have a clearly defined triangular pubis, emphasizing their function related to fertility. This specific form is not accidental. It suggests that these small clay figurines were miniature copies of the large wooden poles, also called Asherahs, which we read about in the Bible. These large poles, as you recall, were public cult objects, often placed next to altars of Baal. In this way, people could have their own Asherah at home, as a smaller, portable version of the public deity. It's like having a miniature statue of a saint or Buddha at home, a small, personal representation of a great deity. Here is one of the most compelling arguments for Asherah's immense popularity: the enormous frequency with which these figurines are found. But it's not just the number that matters. They are found with almost no accompanying images of male deities from the same period. This is key. If the Israelites worshipped only Yahweh or even Baal, why aren't there as many figurines of male deities? The lack of other deities, combined with the abundance of Asherah figurines, tells us very clearly. She was incredibly popular and widely accepted in all strata of Jewish society. From the poorest peasant to the city dweller, from women praying for fertility to men seeking blessings for their harvest, Asherah was with them. This forces us to rethink the traditional view of ancient Israelite religion. It was not strictly monotheistic, at least not in the daily practice of ordinary people.
It was much more complex, much more syncretistic, and much more human than it is presented to us. Asherah was not just a pagan idol, but an important, beloved, and revered aspect of the faith of the ancient Israelites.
To understand why Asherah was so revered, we must return to the fundamentals of ancient life. In a society entirely dependent on agriculture and the continuation of the lineage, the concepts of fertility and childbirth were of paramount importance. Deities that embodied these forces were naturally central to people. This is where Asherah shone. The widespread belief was that she promoted female fertility and, vitally, eased childbirth. In a world without modern medicine, childbirth was an extremely dangerous event for both mother and child. Any help, divine or otherwise, was welcomed. It's not surprising that a goddess who offered comfort and hope in such moments would be deeply revered in every home. Her presence instilled security, promising the continuation of the family and community. Now comes one of the most striking and undeniable pieces of evidence for Asherah's role in the daily lives of ancient Israelites. We're talking about an ancient Hebrew incantation text from the 7th century BCE, discovered in Arslan Tash, now Tel Tayanot, an amulet designed to ward off evil spirits. This text, written in one of the dialects of ancient Hebrew, contains a direct address. Imagine the following phrase, translated from the ancient language: Asherah, please help this woman in childbirth. Do you understand what this means? In the heart of ancient Israel, where Yahweh was the official deity, people turned directly to Asherah for help at the most vulnerable moment, childbirth. This amulet is not just an artifact. It is a window into people's personal faith, into their hopes and fears, and it confirms that Asherah was an active and invoked force in their lives, especially when it came to women's health and the continuation of life. This is powerful evidence that cannot be ignored. And now, let's delve into a more intriguing and speculative territory that might suggest a deeper connection of Asherah to the earliest biblical traditions, those from the book of Genesis. Do you remember the story of Leah, one of Jacob's wives? After giving birth to her 4th son, she named him Asher. The name Asher is phonetically very close to Asherah. Is this just a coincidence? Or is it a subtle but powerful hint of an earlier, deeper connection to the goddess Asherah in the very patriarchal traditions of Genesis? This theory suggests that the worship of Asherah may have been so ingrained that even the names of biblical figures preserved an echo of her presence. If this is true, it would mean that Asherah was not just a Canaanite deity that was imported later, but that her influences may have been part of the cultural and religious landscape of the early Israelites from the very beginning. This is a potential reinterpretation that forces us to rethink firmly established notions about the origin of ancient Israelite faith. Asherah's popularity in ancient Israel was no accident. She was deeply woven into people's lives through beliefs about fertility, childbirth, and the protection of newborns. From archaeological excavations revealing thousands of her figurines, to the shocking incantation text from Arslan Tash invoking her during childbirth, and to the bold yet thought-provoking connection to biblical Leah, all these elements paint a picture of a goddess whose influence was far more widespread and profound than we ever imagined.
And so, after all that we have examined, the picture is clear. Our understanding of Asherah undergoes a dramatic change. She is no longer just some suppressed, marginal, pagan deity that occasionally appears in biblical warnings. No. Archaeology and a careful reading between the lines reveal a widely revered figure. She was part of the homes of ordinary people, their patron in daily life, and even, as shocking as it may sound, found a place in the very temples of ancient Israel, including the central Jerusalem temple. Here lies the essence of the conflict between biblical narratives and archaeological truths. The Bible, as we know it, often presents a simpler, more monolithic, and sometimes idealized narrative of Israel's faith. It was written with a specific purpose: to establish and affirm monotheism, to combat deviations. But archaeology, it gives us a glimpse into the raw, often messy, and multi-layered reality of ancient beliefs. It shows us that the faith of the ancient Israelites was much more complex, more syncretistic, and more adaptable than we are used to thinking. They worshipped Yahweh, but often sought comfort and help from other deities, like Asherah, especially on matters of fertility and survival. And this is a lesson that transcends merely the history of an ancient goddess. It is a reminder that history, once buried, ultimately always resurfaces. No matter how carefully certain facts may have been concealed or erased, new evidence, through the diligent work of archaeologists and researchers, finds its way into the light. These discoveries challenge us to rethink our preconceptions not only about ancient faith, but also about how history itself is constructed. They make us realize the true complexity of their beliefs, a world where monotheism and polytheism coexisted side by side, where the needs of daily life shaped religious practices in ways that we may find difficult to imagine today. Asherah, the forgotten goddess, is no longer silent. Her echo resonates loudly and clearly through the centuries, telling a story that was waiting to be revealed. What do you think about these revelations? Share your opinion in the comments below. If this video has provoked you to think and seek more truths, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.